All right, welcome to another episode of the WGON Live Traffic Report. I'm Eric.
And I'm Matt.
We're joined tonight by very special guest author Daniel Kraus. How are you doing, sir?
Hey, I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thanks for coming.
Yeah, appreciate you being on with us. And you, of course, have a novel coming out soon. It's a Tuesday?
Tuesday, technically Tuesday, yeah.
The Living Dead, a novel that you technically co-wrote with George Romero. There,
It's a friend of mine described my book as it's a textbook.
Yeah,
it's got some heft to it.
It's a bludgeon, definitely.
I love it. And I got I saw your tweet about the pages. I like that in books.
Yeah, it's funny because I guess some people now when they see these old-fashioned deckled edges, they're called, they think it's ruined. They think it's been damaged, but really it's an effect. Yeah. It's a cool book. It has color on the title page, which is, I mean, I've published 10 books and I've never seen this before. Let me see if you can find it. Yeah. So it has these like blood spatters. That's really rare.
Yeah, and I like the paper that it's on too.
It's a great package. It's really nice. And the UK is cool too. It's got this much brighter kind of coral cover. Yeah. It's totally different. Has normal page edges. I don't like the back quite as much. It's just sort of straightforward, but it's got a nice look and it's got a really good texture to it. If you can, it's hard to show, and you can kind of see it there.
Yeah.
When does that come out in the UK?
I think it comes out like maybe a day later. It's pretty much simultaneous.
Excellent. Yeah. Excellent. Actually, when you were showing off the copies, one thing that came to mind, it was originally scheduled to come out a few months ago. Can you talk about the delay? What happened there?
Yeah. So, this book on zombie epidemic get overtaken by the real pandemic. So the original June, it was something like June 4th or June 5th or something, pub date had to be pushed, as did the pub date of all sorts of books. I think any book that was considered kind of a bigger book that had a lot of interest was pushed, just because those were when those decisions were being made, we were right in the early panic of it. And no one had any idea what it was going to look like come June. And there was a big, like 3-week book tour planned that went all across the country and back. And there just was no telling if that would be around would we be able to, travel in June. And so they pushed it to August, all of us thinking that certainly by August, things would be back to normal. And we're not even close, but we're not going to push it. At least now we sort of understand the landscape.
Yeah. So, let's get our viewers, up to speed. How you got involved? You went to high school, or you kind of grew up in the same town as Chris Rowe, George's longtime agent, longtime friend of ours, and he picks up the phone one day and gives you a call and says,
"Right,
hey, George has this novel."
Yeah.
You want to do it?
No, I should say I should clarify that Chris didn't give me the job because we went to the same high school.
No, but he kind of knew that you.
But we knew, like, we went to the same high school in a small town in Iowa, so it's really strange that we would hook up together after all these decades. And we didn't know each other well or anything, but it was a small town, so we certainly knew of each other and stuff. And then we graduate in 1993 or 1992, or in his case, and really don't see each other for decades, and probably don't think of each other very often. And then fast forward a whole bunch of years, and he's become a successful manager of all sorts of different kind of talent, and I've become an author. And probably importantly, I was an author who had done a couple of successful collaborations. So I think, Chris probably didn't know a whole lot about me at that point, but he knew a few key things. He knew that that I was a Romero fanatic and a real deep dive student of him, because we had connected one time about 10 or 12 years ago. And that was made very clear that I, grew up with Romero, like a lot of people grew up on Star Wars. And so he knew that, and he knew I had these collaborations in my back pocket. And then possibly from our youth, he had a sense that I was trustworthy. I don't know what that's accurate or not. But so, yeah, then he called me up really out of the blue. I hadn't heard from him in 10 or 12 years probably. And that was it. I mean, that was the phone call that really changed things for me. So how did he kind of lay this out to you and talk about the first time you got to really talk to Suze about the project and some of the ins and outs of that? Well, I had been aware that George was working on a book. Like every once in a while in interviews, he would mention something about it. Not very often, and there was never a lot of information, but occasionally he'd make an offhand reference to, and I'm working on a book. So I sort of knew that, but it certainly wasn't something I was keeping track of or anything like that. So when he called up and said there's this, it was about a month after he died, after George died, and Chris calls me up and he said, look, I'm with Suze, and we've been talking about some projects he had been working on that weren't finished. And probably a lot of those were untouchable because they were in concert with other organizations or other people, and there were rights issues. And I'm guessing a lot of the screenplays were probably complicated. But he had this novel that he had been working on and off for 10 years. And it was, from what he told me and from what I could gather independently, it was kind of a place of solace for him. He would have a lot of trouble in Hollywood and getting movies made in or outside of Hollywood. And then he would kind of pour his frustrations into this book where there were no producers and there was no budget, and he could do whatever he wanted for once. So, he sent, I was blown away and stunned by all this. And he sent me the manuscript, and I read it and just thought it was tremendously exciting and promising. And that's sort of how it started. I didn't talk to Suze for a little while after that yet, until we had until we were at the point of taking offers. We had sent the book out and we're getting offers from publishers. At that point, then I talked to Suze, and then eventually had spent a day with her in Toronto and really dug deep on a lot of stuff. Yeah, so I had mentioned right before we came on air, I went out and picked up the new issue of Scary Monsters. And there's a great 4 or 5 page interview with Dan. So if you guys can get to Barnes & Noble or Books A Million, check this out. In there was something that stood out. When you got presented with this manuscript, was George literally writing it out, or was it a series of notes or outlines? How did you go about taking something George wrote and starting? It was, this is a complicated question, and I can just get into it. But it was, at first, it was just a classic manuscript. It was just a big chunk of a novel, just written out in Microsoft Word or whatever program he used. So there was nothing mysterious about that. It was just part of a novel. What got much more complicated was once I got working on it, I mean, this is WGON Network. I guess I should get into the nitty-gritty details, because this is probably the place to do it. Usually we like the minutia. Yeah, usually I gloss over some of this stuff because I don't think it'll be of interest, but I think it probably would be here. So the book gets announced, and various places pick up the news. And one of those places was the AV Club. And in a very fortuitous decision, I decided to read the comments. They did a little story on how this book had been sold. And I mean, I don't remember the last time I read comments on an internet article. It's usually just a toxic wasteland. So, I mean, I never do it, but I did. And there was a comment on there saying something about, back in back in around 2000, Romero had started sending out chapters from his old website of what he had pitched, or what he had said to his fans or followers of the website was going to be his definitive zombie novel.
And that's called The Death of Death.
And that was called The Death of Death. Now, I wasn't aware of this. Maybe you guys were, but somehow in my George Romero knowledge, I missed that this ever existed. And his website, according to Chris Rowe, was very short-lived. Romero, of course, was a sort of a technophobe, and once things in the kind of forums there turned ugly, which of course they did, he pulled the plug, and I think just despondent about the whole thing. But anyway, I went to the Internet Wayback Machine, which, if you don't know, is a way to sort of dig up defunct websites.
Yep.
And I found traces of his old website and was poking around. And the Wayback Machine is really imperfect, so you're not going to find everything, but you're going to find bits. And I found a page, lo and behold, that was like The Death of Death. Enter your email here, and we'll send you chapters as I write them for, I don't remember, a few bucks. I don't remember how much he charged. But of course, there were no pages on the site, and this email form had stopped working 20 years ago. But that proved to me that this random commenter on the AV Club was right, and there was this other, much earlier attempt at a very similar book. So that's when I got in touch with Suze again and said, look, I'm curious about these couple chapters that he wrote. It would be fascinating if we could find those and I could somehow work them into the manuscript, because every bit of Romero writing was finite and it was precious. So I wanted to find whatever I could. So we finally found a copy of it with Christian Stavrakis, who I'm sure you guys know.
Yep.
And he had a copy of it, and he sent it to us. And these two he was right. There were only 2 chapters, but it was 100 pages. These were really long chapters. So suddenly I had 100 new pages, and it was fantastic stuff, like really good stuff. And it was from a very similar type of book, different characters and so forth, but it was a dry run for the manuscript that I had originally. So it was a kind of a pain in the ass, because I was hundreds of pages into the work at this point, and suddenly I had all this new information. But it was the best kind of pain in the ass, because suddenly I just had a new treasure chest had opened, and I set to finding ways to make it all jive and make it all fluidly work. And that was some of the most enjoyable and most challenging parts of the process, was saying, all right, now I have these new characters and these new situations. Can this character from Death of Death be the same character as this other character in Living Dead? And can this character meet that character? And I tried to find ways to fluidly work everything in. And then there were a couple other things. We also found an old short story that had been lost to time, that he had never published traditionally from the point of view of a zombie. So that was important and educational. And then lastly, Chris Rowe found a 9-page letter that George had written detailing where some of the plot threads were going. That was also a pain in the ass, because at that point I was even more hundreds of pages into the book, and suddenly I had new information about what some of the characters were supposed to be doing.
Whoops.
So that required me to go back yet again and reconfigure and rethink. But again, I was always happy to do it.
Yeah, that was one of the things I had read in that interview, was that you had stumbled upon 100 pages of notes or a manuscript. Was that The Death of Death that you had run into?
Yes. Yeah. So there's the original manuscript, which was the bulk of the book. George's contribution to the book. And then there was The Death of Death, and then a few other little things, a short story, the notes. Yeah.
How much of Death of Death did you kind of work into this novel?
Most of it.
Okay.
I would say I really don't know 2/3 of it. I don't know, but a lot of it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I have a full copy of The Death of Death, but it's been
Yeah.
20 years since I've really read it, but I remember the first couple of pages mirrored the first couple of pages of The Living Dead. It just kind of, they had a very similar vibe. So knowing that okay, it makes more sense now.
Yeah, I'd be curious if when you read the book, if it'll spark any memories, because they're all spread out throughout the book now. So there may be something you read on page 20 of The Death of Death that doesn't show up until page 400 in The Living Dead. So it might be interesting.
Nice.
How about the Living Dead title itself? Was that a working title that you guys just decided to keep, or was that developed later?
That was George's title, so we just kept it. It's very simple, and I think we all liked it because of that. It seemed to communicate a certain heft by being so simple. Like, it seemed to communicate that this was a really important work to him, and Sue seemed to think that it really was. That did in some ways start at the very beginning, day one of the zombie uprising, and in some respects conclude the story. In some ways it does add an ending of sorts to the whole 50 years of his zombie saga. So we like the simplicity and the strength of it.
How much of your prose did you put into the book, or did you try to match kind of George's?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as far as just like volume of it, there's a ton. I mean, at least 50% of the text is mine. George wrote with if you add his notes into it, he's responsible for probably half the book. That half is not necessarily the first half, though. It's spread all throughout. So there's a ton of me in there too. That was unescapable. Sorry, you're gonna have to deal. Readers are gonna have to deal with me too. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I've read a lot of books that are co-written, and you can tell one chapter is author A, one is B, and they're telling the same story, and it definitely shifts gears from chapter to chapter. I just didn't know if you kind of seamlessly blended it in or tried to emulate.
This should be seamless. Basically, what I did was. I mean, for starters, our styles weren't radically different. So it wasn't apples and oranges. It was two different kinds of apples, And I started by working with his pages, and through editing his pages, and his pages differed in quality. Some were very polished and ready to roll, and other ones he hadn't worked as long on, clearly, and were thinner. And so once I'd worked on all of his prose and kind of gotten some of the thinner parts up to speed, I had essentially created the Kraus Romero style. And then I could just kind of continue in that style. So it wasn't really that difficult. I mean, there was a lot that was difficult about this book, but the voice of it was fairly natural.
Without giving spoilers, did you retain George's ideas or the ending that he had written out if he had planned that far ahead?
Oh yeah. I mean, anything I could maintain of George's I did. So I maintained almost everything. There were occasional little bits and bobs that once the story was in editing and stuff that just didn't fit. But I definitely maintained everything I could. As far as the ending goes, I will say this, that George is present at the very ending of the book. The ending was definitely guided by George. Because of how patchy it was, his material throughout the, and when I say patchy, I mean that it wasn't all concentrated in the front. I always had, it wasn't like you were half the book and I could just go freewheeling down the highway after that. It was, I had all these points that I had to connect that he had put out there. So that always kind of kept me on the straight and narrow, that because he had sort of at least put guideposts up that I would have to hit. So there was always a connecting of the dots, and that went all the way to the end.
So unlike your own creation, your own novel, did you ever write a character into a corner and had to back yourself out of it? But George had his guideposts, so you could have avoided those types of pitfalls?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Yeah, because I had these, Guideposts are almost like lighthouses. I always sort of had a beacon of where I was headed. And that wasn't always the case. Some characters, their beacons were a little stronger, and some characters weren't at all strong. And so it really varied. There were some things that had a strong guiding principle that George had instilled early on, but there were some things that did not and required a lot of invention on my part.
Nice. Yeah, I just asked those questions because I'm friends with the likes of Brian Keene and Jonathan Jans, Ron Malfi, all those guys. So I get a lot of those stories where they're working on something. They're like, this isn't where I wanted this character to go. Now I got to figure out how to get them to the end of the book because they're only a quarter of the way in and they're already ready to die or they're in some impossible situation.
Yeah, I mean, I generally don't have that issue because I do a lot of pre-planning. I tend to spend months on a book before I start writing it really in earnest. So I do tons of outlining, lots and lots of timeline work with the goal of avoiding just that. And in this project, it was even less likely that I would write into a corner because I had those lighthouses or guideposts.
With the prevalence of the zombie novels over the last 15 years or so, we talk about Brian Keene and Max Brooks and World War Z and all that. Outside of George's actual writing, what do you think makes this book different from a lot of the other zombie books that tend to come out?
Well, I think the answer is a certain depth, and I don't want to take anything away from any of those books, obviously. Generally today, if you were going to write a zombie novel, first of all, you'd want to think twice about that because there's a whole hell of a lot of stuff out there. But generally, if you're going to do it, you would try to come up with some really unique spin on it, right? Because so many things have been done. And you might say, all right, my zombies are going to fly or whatever. You try to come up with something unique. But George, of course, had no interest in that. He didn't want to innovate past his original ideas. He wanted his zombies were the Romero zombies. So it's not like this book is going to offer some new ability of theirs. This is going to be your classic Romero zombies. But what is interesting about the book and important about the book is what was interesting and important about his movies. It's that he's not really writing a story about zombies. Zombies are a tool with which he's telling a story. He backed into the whole zombie thing, obviously, with Night of the Living Dead. And then, by the end of his career was really, stuck into a corner with him and couldn't make anything unless it had zombies in it. So he had to creatively find ways to tell the stories he wanted to tell using zombies. And this is a really good example of that. You could tell when reading his manuscript what parts of the story really lit him up. He would write, good zombie action, but when he was talking about, when he was digging into characters and backstories, and especially darker human urges, even in good protagonist characters, or his social commentary, that's the stuff where he really lit up and he really caught fire, and that was the prose that always made me sit up and say, wow. This guy really could write. So his interests, I think, in the manuscript he left behind, his interests were more palpable than ever. So go into it. If you're looking for 650 pages of splatter, this is not your book. But George wouldn't have been your filmmaker either. I mean, this is a much, hopefully deeper look at humans and the relationship to each other and the planet and lots of other sort of thornier, denser, complicated issues.
Yeah, George was never a high level splatterpunk type director. There was always meat on the bone with everything he did.
Yeah, right.
Daniel, you came on board in late 2017, but how long had George been working on The Living Dead?
I think when we're talking about just the manuscript titled The Living Dead, I think about 10 years. Okay. So, but it was really on and off. just having spoken to Chris Rowe earlier today, he described him as, he described George as somebody whose attention would waver. He could bust out a script in a few days, and that's what he was used to. And I think a novel is something that's so much more labor intensive. If you're busting out a novel in a few days, I mean, you're just writing all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, right? Like, it's impossible. So he would occasionally, or not occasionally, frequently stop work on it and work on other things and then come back later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had just the opportunity recently to finish up your episode of the Horror Pod Class when you guys were talking about Survival of the Dead. So I kind of wanted to touch base on that. So you had written in a couple of the interviews that you went back and you dove deep into all of George's films and watched the commentaries and read all the interviews and stuff. What was it like going back to watch his films outside of just wanting to go back and watch George's films? You had a different sort of lenses or glasses on. So what was that like? Exactly.
So that's a great question. So once I was on the project, it was rewatching the films, but this time with a purpose, right? Because I knew by that point I was familiar with his manuscript that he had left, and I had a long list of questions that I wanted to try to answer. And because it's me answering them, they're just going to be ultimately, some of them are going to be just my interpretation of the answers, but some of them were just literal factual questions. I wanted to gather up all the information I could about definitively what can zombies do, what can't they do, and some of his manuscript and that old lost story really filled in some of those blanks for me. What percentage of a body does a zombie typically eat? How long before a revival? All these small little questions. And from his movies, I would also take notes on all the actions zombies could take. Like if one tried to drive a car, I would say, okay, I would take a note of that. A zombie can attempt at least to drive a car. They can attempt to use a firearm. In survival, we've got a zombie riding a horse. So I'm not saying these things are common, but I created this long sort of zombie rules document that would keep me aligned with George's viewpoints, and so I wouldn't go outside of that. But watching them looking for answers was fun. I think it was not unlike watching a movie with a commentary track in the sense that your attention changes. You're really looking out for clues, whether they're factual clues or thematic clues or something. I was really in detective mode for those first few months, like really trying to figure out, does he mention something? Is there a line of dialogue in this film that connects with something he said in an interview 15 years earlier? And I can have some eureka moments. And I did have some of those that guided how I worked with the remainder of the story.
Did you just dive back into the zombie films, or did you go back through his whole filmography to kind of uncover whatever it is you could?
The whole filmography, definitely. I paid special attention to the zombie films, obviously, because I was trying to create a timeline of zombie evolution or de-evolution, or however you want to put it. But yeah, it was very important to me to look at everything he did, because I was really out to figure out what makes him tick, to use a cliche. And a lot of my conversations with Suze Romero were about that. If there was something that wasn't clear to me about his belief system or how he felt about, politics or religion or whatever, I wanted to know that stuff so that when I came to various forks in the roads, that I could at least have some better idea of which direction George might head if he were on his own.
Had you seen all of his films by the time you went back and did this?
You insult me. Of course. Of course I had.
I always ask because there's always that one, and I don't mean the amusement park, but I just wanted to. So when you went back and you're watching films, what was what was one of his films that surprised you that you were like, I don't remember liking it that much, but it kind of had a new shine on it?
Let me think. That's a tough one because I've always liked all of his movies. I don't think he made a bad movie. I'm trying to think. I'd always liked Survival, but I liked it even more this time. I'm trying to think. And I'd always liked Martin, but I actually hadn't revisited Martin in probably the longest stretch. Like it had probably been 15 years since I've seen it, and I've always called it one of my favorites of his, but it had been really long since I've seen it. And that one, just blew me away again and just reminded me what an incredible, just independent filmmaker he was, regardless of genre. Just like, that's like a 70s classic that should be talked about when people talk about Midnight Cowboy or Taxi Driver or something. Like that's just a fantastic, gritty 70s picture. So I guess, those are my answers, I think.
Yeah. And I see a comment pop up, and I'm contractually obligated to ask this question on each and every podcast we have guest on. What do you think of Bruiser?
Oh, that's a great question. Bruiser is because I've been asked that before. It's the one that puzzles me the most. Like it's a movie that I like, and I feel like I haven't fully unlocked it yet. But I had a great comment on Twitter the other day because I posted about Bruiser, saying how it's still a movie that I'm sort of puzzling with, that I feel like there's something there, and it's the only movie I feel like I haven't unlocked yet. I haven't found a real inroad to love it. And this person, I don't have the thread up, so I can't quote it, but talked about how important the film was to him as a gay person coming out, and it was a really interesting, refreshing take on changing one's appearance and face. And so comments like that make me just all the hunger to reevaluate it. I think it's intrinsically a fascinating film, but there is something kind of chilly about it. I do tend to think that was completely on purpose, though. So it's I'm kind of in a state of confusion about it, Bruiser.
Well, I never talked to George really about his films, but Bruiser was the one that I talked to a lot. And
oh, interesting.
Yeah, I'm probably the world's biggest Bruiser fan. I absolutely adore the film. So if you ever want to wax about it, let me know, because I do. I could talk about that film, and all the people that are watching know, Jesus, he's talking about Bruiser again. And
yeah, well, let me watch it again sometime, and let's talk again, because it's really the film that I want to talk about the most, because I feel like I understand it the least.
Oh, maybe for our long form Bruiser show, we'll have to have you back for it, because I
would love to get people's perspectives on it. Yeah.
Yeah, and Eric's, kind of like, I love Bruiser, and I love the, Monkey Shine's Dark Half. Obviously, Dawn's my favorite, and Eric is a big fan of Season of the Witch. There's Always Vanilla, and obviously we love Martin and stuff. But it's always neat to get perspectives, because on that podcast you had made mention you like some of the smaller, weirder films of a lot of directors.
Yeah,
and I kind of like that too, and that's why I try to really push films like Bruiser, The Dark Half, Season of the Witch, the stuff that people don't see, that I feel that they have to, because I feel that those are the movies that you're really going to see the filmmaker's personality and their love for certain films and genres really come out, because they're more experimental and they can be themselves a little bit more.
Yeah.
So that's why
I mean, aside from Martin, which kind of goes without saying that needs to be released in a wider way in the U.S., the film that I wish more people were watching is probably Season of the Witch, because I just feel like it would be people would respond to it really well right now, and I just wish it was out there, and it was getting out there to more people.
Mm-hmm.
You spoke, or I think it was off air, there was you had planned a book tour with Q&A. Obviously the coronavirus scenario caused that to cancel, but talk about a little bit of what you had planned?
Well, I hope we can still do it. Maybe when the paperback comes out. So the paperback of the book will probably come out in maybe September of 2021. So I'm hoping there's still enough interest that we can do it. And what it was maybe a 3-week-ish tour of movie theaters. So there were book events, but they would include a screening. So the movie would sort of be up to the theaters, but say that we would show Day of the Dead, and then me plus a guest, someone from that city, maybe affiliated with the theater. That part was kind of up to them. Then we would discuss the film and how it interacted with the book, because most of his films do. And then, talk about the book a little bit. So they were going to be hybrid film book events.
Has the virtual part of the book tour, I mean, obviously outside of the in-person and on the computer thing, has it been any different? Have you seen anything positive come from having to do a book tour virtually now?
Yeah. I mean, all the authors that I know had books come out this year definitely see positives and negatives. Now, keep in mind, my book doesn't come out until Tuesday. So I really haven't done the classic sort of event. Those will start Tuesday night. And then I have maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 planned. It's most nights after the book comes out. So those will really be the classic in conversation with me about, the book. But as far as like interviews and stuff go, some of it's been really good. Some places that before would only interview people if you were in town, in person, have loosened that up, which it doesn't matter that much for this book, because I would have been everywhere on tour anyway, so I could have done those things in person. But there is, I do sort of like being at home. So I mean, in general, not like this, but in general, I do like sitting here in my office and writing and doing being a hermit. So there have been elements to that have been nice. It's been less effort put on the interviewee, I think, and probably more effort put on the interviewers, because now the interviewers are having to deal with different technologies and snafus. And so I think it's been harder for people like you guys, and maybe a little bit easier for the people being interviewed.
Yeah, I don't know, Eric. I think this has worked out pretty well for us. We were audio only until COVID hit, and we got introduced to this software, and we decided to basically do this format and be able to do live shows. And I think we've had a great time doing it. We do a lot of Saturday shows with guests or without, and I think COVID was probably the best thing to happen for this podcast than anything, because we found a little bit more of a rhythm, more of a niche, and I think it's really helped, especially stuff like this. I'm glad we're doing this now instead of recording it on the phone, because we can see each other and kind of just hang out and chat, and it's easier to flow from one conversation to the next. So I'll be interesting to see. I'll probably attend some of those book events for you, just so I can report back to see what people are saying and share with everybody. I
think a lot of people are finding certain skill sets they didn't know they had, or comfort with certain formats they didn't know they were comfortable with, or that they would be comfortable with. So I think we're all learning interesting new things about ourselves. I mean, good and bad, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah, not going away every weekend for a convention is definitely interesting. I'm home a lot more. I don't know if my wife is happy about that or not, because now I'm home and she can tell me to do stuff and I have to do it. But no, I kind of wanted to go back, because I'm contractually obligated per Eric to have to bring up certain things. But you did that podcast with survival. Mm-hmm. What is it about survival that kind of sticks out to you over a lot of the other, zombie films?
I mean, when you're comparing it to just other zombie films,
I meant George. I'm sorry, I meant George's zombie films.
It's part of it's sort of ineffable. Like part of it's just a taste thing where I just really love the pace and tone of that movie. It's got I know he sort of saw it as his Western, and it doesn't feel all that Western to me. But it does have this, for a action horror film, it does have this sort of laconic pace to it. And it just feels smart. Like, it just feels like if the only zombie film that Romero made was Survival, in a way, it's almost a microcosm of all of his zombie films. You've got these two white men arguing over a parcel of land, and then you have this influx of essentially minority figures, mostly, who are treated as outsiders, and you have different strata of society. You've got the sort of the two families battling it out, and then you have the untrusted newcomers, which is a real Western staple. Somebody comes into town and you don't know who they are and you don't trust them. And then you have the zombie society, which is they're almost enslaved in Survival. I just feel like it's very, very deft and makes it look effortless. And I think for a lot of people who are fans of Dawn or something, it was probably too effortless. Like, they were like, well, where's the fireworks? But to me, it's like a beautiful mid-tempo song. It just feels perfect in a way. Like, I could watch it right now. It's just one of those movies that I could just watch again and again. And it's hard, even now, even after having spent an entire hour of a podcast extolling its virtues, even now I'm not sure exactly why I love it. But it's hard to always say why we love what we do.
No, I just love when someone says they really like Survival, because I know it gets a lot of not nice things about it, and a lot of people have tended to avoid it. So when I hear someone, like you said, talk about it the way you do, I get a little more excited because of my personal connection to the film, and I feel that Diary, Survival, Dark Half, a lot of George's unseen films, I think, are some of his best. And like you said, I don't think he ever made a bad film. I just think he made a good film in a different way, and it just doesn't land with a certain audience because they want night, dawn, creep show, day. They want the hits over and over again. Right.
But that's it's easy for me to want to say, those people. But I get it. We all are after something different in art, and maybe I just want to dip my toe into, I don't know, dance music or something, and I don't. But if I did, and then people would be like, "Yeah, but don't you want this? Want these more fringe dance?" No, I just want just enough that get me through the day. So I don't hold it against people if they're really what they just want is Dawn and Day and Creepshow, because those are three almost flawless films. So I appreciate that. But yeah, for us connoisseurs, it's a understandable gut instinct to us to feel a little frustrated about it because there's so much else there in his filmography.
We had a question come in the comments. Is there a preferred vendor for the book?
Well, I mean, there's preferred in the sense that I have a local bookstore that I work with. So if you want your book signed or personalized, then you'll want to go through a store called Mad Street Books, Mad Street Books in Chicago. And they're handling all my personalization. So if you order the book from them and put in the comments that you want it signed to whoever, they're near me. So I'll literally just go down to their store and sign copies. So, but aside from that, I always support independent bookstores, but buy it whatever works for you. And if you pre-order it before Tuesday, so you just have 2 more days, you can upload your receipt from wherever you bought it to the special website that the publisher had. You get this free poster all the copies of it are going to vaporize on Tuesday. So you have to pre-order to get the poster.
Is the poster of the cover art?
No, it's completely different. It's
Okay.
I don't know how to show it to you right now, but it's more of a almost more of a comic book type look with some of the characters on it. But it's out there. I don't know how to show it to you live.
And after tonight's show, we'll definitely put a link up to Mad Street Books so we can drive people there. I'll probably order another copy just to have it signed, and then maybe we'll do a giveaway or something. I'll take my copy and do a giveaway.
I'm heading over there Monday night. I mean, I can go there as many times as required, so don't worry about it. But I'm heading there Monday night to do a big sweep of all the signings and stuff. So
awesome,
nice. So, nope, go ahead.
Oh, just I was curious. Would you finishing something that someone else started? Now that you've completed this, would you do it again?
I mean, it's a particular challenge. First of all, if it was George in a heartbeat, but there's not a whole lot of evidence that he wrote anything else. Like he wrote, his archives, which I've seen. I mean, they are just what a treasure trove. I mean, it is filled with screenplays of all sorts. You really, once his archives are public, people are really going to see the breadth of his interest. There's every genre you can imagine he wrote scripts about. But the only traditionally published prose fiction he ever wrote was the short story Clay. I think that's it in the 80s. And then this book. So that aside, would I do it again? It'd be a real weird niche for me to have if I completed people's unfinished manuscripts. I guess I wouldn't say categorically no. I mean, if it was something really fascinating, but it'd be hard to live up to this, where it's the unfinished manuscript of my favorite artist.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, I've been trying to, keep track of your Twitter feed and stuff because, you're putting a lot of good stuff out there and people are asking a lot of questions. I didn't see it, but what is your favorite George film?
Well, I always discount Night of the Living Dead. I've seen that too many times. I saw it, his first movie I remember seeing. So it's like, I always say Night of the Living Dead is more like an album to me. It's like it's just part of my makeup. It's part of just the song in my head, so I can't realistically judge Night. It's too close. It's really hard for me. I mean, I want to say something off kilter just to be unique, but the truth is, man, I love Day of the Dead. It was really probably my second Romero film that I really got into as a kid. And man, I just think it's a perfect film. And I've always been a sucker for movies that are, it's not quite a one location movie, but it's a limited location movie, with a set finite cast of characters. I've just always been drawn to that. And I feel like it's such an efficient, economical movie. I feel about that kind of like I feel about Cronenberg Fly, which has basically 3 characters and barely more than one setting. And I just really admire being able to pull so many levels of drama and themes out of so few elements. So I would say probably Day of the Dead, but I am definitely, just like all the casual fans out there, I'm super, super obsessed with Creepshow. Like I saw that, a billion times before I was, out of childhood. So as far as the big ones go, yeah, it's Day and Creepshow for me.
In your note, you mentioned the Hal Roach colorized version. And I think that was actually the first VHS I ever purchased in my life. I was going to ask, was a similar situation with you?
I didn't. I do have the Hal Roach VHS, but I picked it up later. but I undoubtedly, I mean, I remember seeing it at a young age, seeing the colorized version. So certainly I grew up watching both the black and white and colorized. And I remember being weirded out even as a kid seeing the colorized one, because it just, it just looked, it was like watching the movie Tron, it was like, it was like a different kind of reality. It just didn't quite jive.
It was like they painted it with watercolors and put it over the film.
Exactly. But have you seen the newest colorization?
I think so. Yeah,
I haven't
either, but I have it. I own it. It's the one that has, I think, the riff tracks commentary, but it also has the latest colorization. And I want to be very clear here that I'm sort of not a fan of the colorization. But from the stills that I've seen of it, it's pretty impressive. Just the technical accomplishment of it. I mean, I assume it's mostly just done by automated computer program. Listen, I'm not in favor of it, but for what it is, it did seem to be certainly a light speed jump from the Hal Roach.
Mm-hmm. No, anytime anybody mentions the Hal Roach colorized VHS, I mean, okay, you're one of us, man.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think there's, I think I mentioned this in the note. There is something, I rewatched the Hal Roach one last year, just because I hadn't seen it since I was a kid. Yeah, awesome. Just because I hadn't seen it since I was a kid, and I wanted to get a sense of it. And there, with my previous statements notwithstanding, there is something about it. It looks a little bit like faded denim. Like there's something so worn out about it that, as I write in the author's note, I almost found it touching in a way. Like you could feel the strain of the film, and you could sort of sense how important this movie was to people, and continued to be to people, and how people wanted ways to see it anew again. And maybe this didn't work, but the effort of it does say something, like it speaks volumes that people would try to do this. So, I mean, it's at least an interesting artifact.
Well, maybe speaking of another interesting artifact, you've got the poster behind you. I've got to ask, have you had a chance to see George Romero's The Amusement Park? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I did. I saw it before it was restored. So I saw a copy that was a bit discolored and faded. I had actually not seen the restoration. I couldn't get to New York when they were showing it. But the cut I saw was complete. It just wasn't as beautiful as it is now. Yeah, and I think it's amazing. Like it is. I think it's a huge, huge rediscovery. Have you guys seen it?
Yes.
Okay. Well, yeah. For people who haven't seen it, I mean, it's for those out there who we were talking about earlier, who just sort of like Day Dawn and Creepshow, they're probably not going to dig it. But for serious Romero fanatics, I think it is one of his most disturbing movies. I think only a few times did he really set out to really frighten people. Most of his movies, I think, are a little more cerebral. I think Night of the Living Dead, he was really out to scare people. And maybe arguably Crazies. I don't know. I'd have to think about it. But I think the amusement park is kind of terrifying. And it's the sensory aspects of it. It's so brightly lit, and the sound is so overwhelming. And he's doing that editing style that he had during the Crazies era. It's an assault on the senses. It feels like a horror film. It's cut like a horror film, even if it's not technically a horror film. I'm just a huge fan of it. And it was really important to the book, because the reason I asked who's about it in the first place was that the third act of Living Dead, again, not giving away anything, has something to do with an element akin to hospice care. I won't go any further than that, but I knew of the amusement park. I knew that it had existed, and it was about the sort of mistreatment of old people. And I knew, boy, if only I could see that, it would really help inform this last section of the book. So I asked Suze if she had ever knew anything about it, and she was like, "Yeah, we just recently found it." And so I was blown away, and so she let me see it, and it was very good timing as far as that went.
With all of his films, I mean, he did a lot of horror, and he touches different parts of horror. What do you think George's legacy is?
Well, I mean, I think when you look at the sort of masters of horror that are generally lumped together, John Carpenter and Tobe Hooper and Wes Craven, they each had certain things that I think they revolutionized. I think Romero was the thinker. I think he was the one who, aside from his editing, which I think was pretty forward thinking, he wasn't like a super stylist in the sense of creating these, masterpiece compositions that would be studied for, light and shadow and Kubrickian positioning and camera movement. But he was, I think, the brain of the horror masters. I think his legacy is going to be that, one of the most powerful examples of horror, but also just independent film, of showing that of what horror can be. I mean, it's so easy to draw a line from Night of the Living Dead to Get Out, to show, to prove what horror can do, how you can tell other stories with the tropes of horror, and that kind of metaphorical use, certainly goes beyond horror, and certainly Night of the Living Dead is a landmark of just independent cinema, not just horror. So his legacy is going to be one of the major examples that hopefully inspired generations and will continue to inspire generations of what you can do, of the power metaphor can wield in film, or really any media.
Is there any hope for the novel, beyond the written form, maybe to be picked up in some other medium?
Yep. I think there's I think that's could very well happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I would, if that's the case, I would love to see it maybe as a series, because there's so much there.
Yeah.
And one thing about, like I said earlier, there's always a lot of meat on the bone with George's stuff. And I think if you strip it down to try to do one movie, you're going to eliminate 90% of what makes that book stand out because of it being George. And we see that a lot of times with the Stephen King adaptations is,
right.
Like, oh, I love it. Oh, but they didn't put this in, or they changed this character, or they changed this.
Yeah.
And you kind of lose what makes that book special when you go and watch it. So I would love to see 6 to 10 issue or episode miniseries somewhere that does it justice.
That would be a good way to go. I think we never did really have a Romero series or a limited series. He never got that far. There were, way back when, or however many years ago it was, there was, talk about a Night of the Living Dead series, and it didn't happen. And instead The Walking Dead happened. But we've never had that. And so I think that is one really smart way to go about adapting the novel.
When you were going back and you were watching George's films, you had mentioned you watched a lot of George's favorite films, Tales of Hoffman, Red Shoes, Quiet Man. What was it like going back and watching those to kind of help get inside of George's mind?
Right. So my hypothesis, which is in retrospect, it was kind of a weird one, was that I was going to study George's inspirations, and that was going to help me get inside his head. And the real goal was, if I could if I could watch his favorite movies, for example, because most of his movies, although I did look at other music and other things, if I could study those movies and find the things that inspired George and say, aha, I see an element in this movie that I can see reflected in his work. If I could start to find those, then I too could be inspired by these works and use that to help bridge the chasms that existed in this incomplete manuscript. And I studied Tales of Hoffman the most because that was the most important movie to George. And it did, unless they're just magic feathers convincing me that I was onto something, which is always also possible. It did seem helpful. And, particularly from Tales of Hoffman, I did borrow a lot from that film thematically and structurally, because there was a certain lack of structure to the novel. I had these islands of his work sort of in the novel, and a lot of bridges to build, and it wasn't really clear of the dividing lines. So I did use the 3-act structure of Tales of Hoffman as a guide for the 3-act structure of the novel, and use the theme, what I saw. So it's very personal interpretation, but what I saw as the theme to the 3 acts of the opera, use those as the themes to the 3 acts of the novel, and then a million other little things. And then Quiet Man was another one that I studied, and boy, that one really puzzled me. I could not, because I'd seen The Quiet Man once or twice before, and I've never gotten it. Like it's an enjoyable enough movie, but I just could not figure that one out. Like, what was George seeing in this? And then I was part of this Reflections of Romero panel a couple of years ago, I think, in Pittsburgh. And Steve Schlossman, who did the zombie autopsies, that author, he was there, and he had grown close to George at some point. And it turns out on this panel, he starts talking about how they would discuss. George would give Steve assignments. Go watch this movie and we'll talk about it. And so one of the movies they did that with was The Quiet Man. And Steve's reaction is the same as mine. He's like, I don't get it. What are you finding in this movie? And George told him, and I'm very hesitant to say what he said, because I feel like it unlocks too much of the book. But when Steve said what George told him was the takeaway from The Quiet Man, it just it changed the whole the latter half of the book for me. Like, I suddenly understood, and I was like, oh, this is a huge theme that runs through all of George's works that The Quiet Man really succinctly articulates. So I was always on the lookout for little clues like that, and that was a really big one, actually.
A question from the comments. It was whether or not you had used early drafts of Day or Day of the Dead or Dead Reckoning scripts for elements for the Living Dead.
No, I didn't use them, but I did read them and was familiar with them as part of just my research about what George, just more research about George, what he wrote about, what his concerns were. The script, the original script to Land of the Dead, actually provided a lot of insight. There's not a lot in the book about zombie animals, but trying to just phrase this carefully. It hinges on the idea of zombie animals in an important way. And one of the things that I dug up in researching Romero was his surprising interest in the topic of zombie animals in his later years. In several interviews and commentary tracks, he would talk about it and how fascinated he was by it, which was kind of news to me. And Land of the Dead had a deleted zombie animal scene. They didn't shoot it. He cut it before they shot for budgetary reasons, really. But that was one of the clues that got me searching for other mentions that he made of zombie animals. And once I began to understand what he was, in theory, talking about doing with zombie animals, particularly in the excised Land of the Dead script, it led to a whole string of thought where I was like, okay, so I can say this much because you can find the script. The zombie rats, there were zombie rats in Land of the Dead originally, and the zombie rats started attacking the humans. And that was a big moment for me when I really thought that through, because there's a lot of element to his zombie films that rest on the assumption that the zombies are cannibals in a way. But if the zombie rats were cannibals, they would be eating living rats, you know? So the zombie rats were not attacking the living rats. They were attacking humans, which made me realize, okay, there are no cannibals here. What there are is anti-human. So whether you're a zombie rat or a zombie human, you're coming after humans. So once I understood that, I was able to develop this whole theory, and it's spelled out pretty clearly in the author's notes. So anyone can kind of read my train of thought and feel free to disagree with it, of how the whole zombie thing would play out. Like if it was an anti-human event that was happening, what did that mean? What was the end game? What was the purpose of it all? And so I did think a lot about these bigger questions and trying to figure out the whole thing.
Nice. I totally forgot about that deleted scene, but that is interesting. Like you said, yeah, zombie animals are not eating zombie animals. They're going after humans. So it's definitely something more than eating your own kind if you're undead. Yeah, and I think there's zombie animals in his toe tags comic, which I know is there were some things he worked on that were a little uncanon, even for him. And there was, there's the graphic novel adaptation of Land of the Dead. And I was really hoping that would have the zombie rat scene, but alas, it does not. It looks like there was another question, and this was a question I was going to ask anyway. So what are your thoughts on Knight Riders? Oh,
I love Knight Riders. Yeah. It's another one of those, I mean, boy, like that's another movie that I put beside Martin as a 70s classic. It's so unbelievably unique. Like there's nothing out there like Knight Riders. And the fact of how committed it is to its weirdo premise. Even its length, it's unusually long for a movie of that sort, whatever that sort is. It is so clearly a passion project and a labor of love, and so idiosyncratic. I feel like when you watch Knight Riders, you are really watching a George Romero film where he's not being forced to use a zombie in this. He's not being forced to make a horror film. Like this is an example of a non-typecast George. If he had been able to successfully follow Night of the Living Dead with, There's Always Vanilla, that was really successful, let's say. He would have turned, as his archives show, he would have turned to all sorts of genres. And including films that have no apparent genre, like Knight Riders, that exist totally on their own. I don't know what genre you'd call that. Just Romero.
Yeah.
So I love it. I love it. It's just so bizarre. And usually the people I introduce it to will be interested in King Arthur in some way. And I'll be like, all right, so I got this movie for you. You haven't heard about it. You haven't seen it, but it's a take on Camelot that is quite unique.
I'll say.
What in the author's notes, you list a lot of the projects George was attached to, and they are quite numerous. What's the one you wanted to see George make the most?
Oh man, I've got that list right here. Let me glance at it. While I'm looking, there was a script that I paged through when I was going through his archives that was called Gun Person. And it was a Western. I mean, he really loved Westerns. Yeah, it has a weird title. Gun Person. And Gun Person was and I didn't read it carefully because I had limited time, but I scanned the whole thing. And Gun Person is a Western, entirely character populated by women. And because I didn't have time to read it deeply, I don't know if there's a reason for that, or if he was just doing sort of a film experiment where it's just like, we're going to make a Western and everyone's going to be a woman and we're not going to address why. I don't know enough about it, but it's fascinating. Okay, so I'm looking at the list now. There's so much here. And some of these are just titles that, I would find reported in Hollywood Reporter or something. But some of these are scripts that I at least glanced at. I don't know where it is in here in this list, but he did a lot of development over the years on Bigfoot projects. In his archives, there's a trove, like decades. He would toy around with Bigfoot projects. He's got sketches of Bigfoot's, really detailed sketches, and I think at one point he wanted to cast there was a famous Pittsburgh Steeler from the 70s. I'm blanking on who it was, as maybe the Bigfoot. So that was clearly something that meant a lot to him. There's the Bell Witch, which is a actual myth that I don't know a lot about, but that's another one that in the archives pops up now and again. Like he was really fascinated by that one. Doing a really quick glance here, I would have loved to see him do The Long Walk.
Yeah, that's one that I was talking to someone about a couple of months ago, and they said it's basically, it was like made for George to make.
Lastly, I would say that one of the coolest things that I saw in the archive was The Wine of the Fawn, or there's no just called Wine of the Fawn. That was going to be his first film, and they decided to make Night of the Living Dead instead. And it's a really interesting script. It's very boy, I'm trying to think of a movie to compare it to. It takes place like in old England, and there's some people sort of traipsing across the land, and it's all very Bergman-y, I guess. But it's really interesting, and the ending of it really reminds me of the ending of Night of the Living Dead. It's similarly shocking and depressing. It's like that was something he was certainly interested in. And maybe the last thing I'll mention is what in the book I just call Untitled George Romero Wrestling Project. And this was one, I wouldn't put it on the top of my list, but this was something fascinating to look at in his archives. It was an unfinished screenplay that was about local Pittsburgh wrestlers. I don't know much about wrestling, but there was a heyday, right? Like maybe the 70s or 80s of local wrestling. Every city would have their own little circuit of local professional wrestlers. And this was sort of about, I think, the Pittsburgh scene, which I just think is just such an oddity. He had a broad interest.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like Iron City Ass Kickers.
I don't know what that is, but it sounds right.
That's a George Romero short film based on a Pittsburgh wrestling promotion.
Why do I not know this?
we just screened it 2 weeks ago when we did our George Romero watch along for the anniversary of his passing. It was made in 1999-2000, starring Laurie Cardille, George, Chris Stavrakis.
Yeah, right. I have heard about this. Yeah.
That's what it sounds like. It just sounds like maybe Iron City Ass Kickers was a place name holder to something bigger. Maybe Iron City Ass Kickers was a proof of concept.
Mm-hmm.
Can I see this somewhere?
It's on YouTube. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Good.
And if you look on our channel, watch it on YouTube, and then watch the hour-long special that on our YouTube channel afterwards, where we did a live commentary with the people who made it.
I thought I had seen most of his oddities, but I haven't seen that one. I've seen most of his industrials and commercials and stuff like that, but not this one. This sounds great.
Yeah.
It must be seen. Yes.
Yeah, we just started talking about it. Eric and I were in Pittsburgh in June, just kind of traipsing around, going to locations and kind of hanging out. And I think that's when we first started talking about it. And then we came back and watched it. And then we did the watch along with Day of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead. And as the intermission, we did Iron City Ass Kickers with the guys that were making it, JB Destiny and Gator and Chris Davrakis and Mark Ritchie. And it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Just short 20-minute thing. And George plays one of the guys in the bar. And definitely go and watch it when you're done here.
Oh yeah.
If you have time. It's definitely interesting. It's one of those that you hear about offhand once 5, 6, 7 years ago. And then you come back and you're like, George made a wrestling movie? And you'd be surprised.
He clearly was into it. Yeah, I mean, who knows? This might be it. The thing is that I believe the script that I read, and I can't confirm this, was more recent than this. How old is this Iron City Ass Kickers?
99, 2000.
That old? That new?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, maybe it is the same thing.
Interesting.
Yeah. If you watch the watch along on our YouTube page, you hear a lot from Chris Davrakis about how George just wanted to put it together and how they went and shot it and how it all came together. It's a lot more fascinating than what you would believe.
Yeah. Oh, I'm excited. Yeah. Listen, this is like what it was like when I would find bits of material for the book. Like every time I think I know everything, something else pops up, and it's like a small gift that I must claw at immediately.
Yeah, when you go down that rabbit hole when you're researching a book, you never know what's going to happen, and it is amazing how deep you can get and what comes to light, and still surprises you after all these years.
I mean, you just wait till the archives are open. I mean, it's like the kind of things that they're finding are going to blow people's minds. It's not just scripts; it's other sort of artifacts that are just earlier idea versions. Concepts of movies we know and love. It's some tremendous stuff that's going to come out.
Yeah, we're getting antsy to go see it. Like we're definitely chomping at the bit to finally get this out. And that's why we say, that's why we love Suze. She's really championed about putting this out there for the fandom, and she sees the bigger picture of hoping George and his work can inspire another filmmaker or another set of filmmakers to come in, especially female filmmakers, you never know who's going to, what piece of George's work is going to resonate with a filmmaker that inspires them to make their Night of the Living Dead. Yeah.
I mean, that's what's so amazing about what Suze is doing. Like, I think most people would have just said, all right, this is a treasure chest of potential money to be made. And we're going to hold it tight, and we're going to let out little bits here and there where we think we can make a profit. But by just opening it up so that everyone can see everything that's in there, that's a kind of selfless act that, you don't see very often. And, and this isn't a lesser known minor filmmaker. This is George Romero. So, I think that's just incredibly commendable thing that she's doing.
Yeah, it's one of those, like, George's influence is so wide reaching. A lot of people might not always know the name, but his films have touched a lot of people who watch movies and TV shows in more ways than they know. And hopefully when this archive hits, it's going to really help blow the lid off of what the foundation is going to do. Yeah. And I'd love to see a filmmaker come out and say it's because of George Romero, or it's because of, the stuff I saw because of the foundation that really made me go out to make it. And it's a huge hit for him.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. I mean, to say the least, there's, at the very least, there's an incredible book to be put together of all of the artifacts that are the pictures.
Great idea.
There are so many, just the photographs alone that are in there. The old design sketches, because, George was an artist. Contracts. I mean, some of that stuff is probably protected, but some of it probably isn't. There's so much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you've got another book coming out this year, right?
Yeah, I have. I've got one more book this year and a comic book.
And the book this year I've read is about a teddy bear. Or
yes. I love talking about this book because it makes people scratch their heads. So I wrote a teddy bear book, which is the least likely thing. It's kind of like me, George, making Knight Riders, right? I've got a book coming out in September. So just a little over a month after The Living Dead. Completely different audience. So this is for kids, maybe like upper elementary school age. But like all my stuff, because I've written other stuff for young adults, all my stuff reads up really well. So this is something that kind of like, in the same way that like a Neil Gaiman's kids book is read by adults, like this is something that adults can read too and understand at a different level than kids will. And it's the first of a trilogy that's called the Teddy Saga. So the first book they threw us away is about these 4 teddy bears who wake up in a trash dump, in a city dump, and they don't know why they're there. They don't know why they're walking and talking. Most of them are still in their brand new store boxes, and so they go on this perilous 3-book journey of leaving the dump and heading into the city to try to figure out what they did to get thrown away as brand new teddies. And it's inspired a lot by Watership Down, so it's like, instead of sensitive, delicate rabbits heading into nature, you've got another very delicate set of creatures in these teddy bears who go on this pretty harrowing journey that takes some fairly dark twists and turns. I love it because it's so different for me, but in some way it really does fit with my other books too. It definitely has a very dark sensibility to it.
Nice. Yeah, I was reading a little bit about that. I'm excited for it. And I have to admit, I haven't read any of your stuff, but now I'm going to. This was my gateway, and I'm going to go back and pick up the rest of your stuff, just because now I have time to read again.
Yeah.
After working on my own, so I'm definitely going to be finishing The Living Dead here shortly. I tried to read it all this week. I just ran out of time, and
it's long. Yeah,
that's okay. I like long books. I like long movies and long books. I like ones that I can get into. I'd hate for them to be over so fast. And
yeah, me too.
So it's 3 books. This one's coming out September. Do you already have the other ones planned to be coming out next year then?
Yeah, come out yearly. So the next book will be out in September 2021.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Awesome. And where can people find you? Where are you hanging out on the social media these days?
Right now I'm doing a lot of press, so I'm on Twitter and Instagram and a little bit on Facebook. That changes though. There are times where I will go off, like I disappeared for as long as a year before. So really, if you want to find me, just go to my website, danielkraus.com, and that has all the links to all the various things that I'm doing at any given time.
And you're at Daniel D. Kraus on Twitter, right?
Yes,
okay.
Correct.
Just make sure the folks that do the tweets know where to find you and hang out. Like I said, I've been enjoying watching you. And tomorrow afternoon, you're doing a Dawn of the Dead tweet along. Is that correct?
Yeah, I am. I'm going to watch Dawn of the Dead. I did a little informal poll of what zombie movie people wanted me to watch. So I'm gonna. This was again a remnant of something else that we were going to do that got canceled. So I'm just gonna homebrew this one. So I'm gonna watch Dawn of the Dead at 8 p.m. Eastern tomorrow on Twitter, and the hashtag is Dawn Watch.
Dawn
Watch. And I'm gonna watch it with the very famous artist Alex Pardee, who is a huge Romero fanatic. So we're just going to watch it. We're going to watch the U.S. theatrical cut. And if you want to watch, just start that cut at 8 p.m. Eastern. And I'm just going to, it's weird. Out of all of George's movies and all the interviews I do, oddly enough, the one I end up talking about least is Dawn of the Dead. So this will be, one of the few times I've really will get to dig deep into Dawn.
Nice. Yeah. Awesome. Sue's informed us that's her least favorite.
Yeah. She's pretty upfront about that.
No, yeah. So we'll definitely, we're going to share that out for everybody to get. We're going to get so many people. Your hand's going to cramp from signing autograph books.
Okay, great.
Hope that works for you. I'll do the Dawn Watch tomorrow night and hang out and see what comes up. Again, thank you for getting George's book out to us.
Yes.
This is a post Romero world, and when he passed, your story of George's pass, that hit me very close because it was a very similar type day, especially for all of us. It devastated us, and the fact that we're still getting George Romero material from George himself is fantastic, and it's heartwarming. And I know we all thank you very much for the work that you've done.
Well, I mean, you don't have to thank me. I mean, it's I'm just going to pass along the thanks. I just want to thank George. I mean, this is something that, writing is a business, but this is something I would have done for $0. Don't tell anyone. But he's extremely important to me. I would not be sitting here without him. None of us would be. Yep. So yeah. I mean, you're welcome. It was my absolute pleasure and duty to do it.
Yeah. Now, again, can't thank you enough for the time today. We know you're getting ready to start this whirlwind virtual tour. It's kind of already started. Again, been watching on Twitter. You're anywhere and everywhere in the book world. So again, thank you so very much for spending the time with us.
Hey, anytime.
And the George fans, definitely. I've been watching the comments. They're throwing a lot of love to Shape of Water and everything else. So expect an uptick in your book sales. Hopefully we'll get a bunch of people to get you on their shelves.
Yeah, buy the book. Don't do it for me. Do it for George. And I'll come back and we'll discuss Bruiser.
Yes, please. I will keep up with you on that because that's
great.
It's definitely something I'm looking for. I'm even more excited to do our Bruiser episode now. We did a poll about which one of George's films they want me and Eric to do long form, and for a while Bruiser was creeping up there, and all of a sudden like Knight Rider shot out of a cannon. So we have to do Knight Riders first, which I'm sure we could get soon because I'll definitely want to get Bruiser here on the docket. We'll get you back when everything settles down a bit, and
great.
We'll make it fun.
All right, man. I can't wait.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Daniel.
All right, guys.
All right,
bye,
good luck.
Everyone. All right, thank you.
Take care.
Stay scared.
You too.